We want those great Canadian truckers to know that we are with them all the way. They are. They've really shown something. It's time to move on.
Freedom Convoy USA.
Mr. Reagan.
Currently, some 500 rigs are clogging the streets of Ottawa, Ontario, the capital of Canada. They're protesting the harsh vaccine mandates set forth by the Canadian government. Since January 15th, Canada has declared that only fully vaccinated truck drivers may enter the country. Well, most truckers in Canada regularly travel to the United States, and so this mandate works effectively as a total vaccine mandate for the trucking industry. And you know what? Some truckers don't want to get vaccinated. And so these truck drivers have gathered together in Ontario to protest. That is their right in a free country. I mean, it's not America, but, you know, it's relatively close. Naturally, the government of Canada is not happy about this. Growing up, I often scoffed at protests. They never seemed to do anything. They didn't influence legislation. And more often than not, they seemed to sway public opinion against the cause they were protesting for. There was one exception, of course. This was the civil rights movement of the 1960s. That movement had a real impact. It swayed America. It swayed politicians. And it turned the will of the people into political pressure, and then it turned that political pressure into actual legislation. Not since the civil rights movement have I seen anything that's had anything like that kind of real impact. Until now, this convoy is an incredibly powerful movement. These truckers are expressing the will of the people of Canada in a loud and forceful way, and it may actually produce real legislative changes in Canada. I certainly hope that it does. But let's make this a little bit more relevant to the United States, because a lot of people in the comment section of my videos and on Twitter have asked me why I think that we haven't done this in America. Why haven't American truckers started a convoy in the same way the Canadians have? I mean, after all, the Australian truckers have organized a convoy and they're heading to their capital city, Canberra. So what's the problem with American truckers? And up until recently, I would respond, well, despite the fact that Biden is trying to impose truly authoritarian vax mandates on every American business requiring vaccines to go to work, it hasn't actually happened. Thankfully, the courts have blocked this, and many Americans have been free to continue working in spite of the fact that they do not want to get jabbed.
The Supreme Court has issued 2 decisions related to the Biden administration's vaccine mandates. They have blocked that vaccine mandate that applied to large employers with 100 people or more.
In Canada and Australia, however, the mandates are far more severe. Their governments have been able to assert far more aggressive authoritarian measures. In the United States, as bad as it seems, thankfully, we've only experienced authoritarian light. But this isn't exactly the full story, because non-US citizens are in fact required to be fully vaccinated in order to come into America. And so the US has essentially enacted their own mandate on Canadian truckers. US truckers are, of course, exempt. So if anyone would actually want to protest, it would probably be the Canadian guys. But in any case, I can no longer say any of this because American truckers are planning a freedom convoy.
I'm actually a co-organizer of one that we are putting together for the United States to go to California to D.C. At this point, we're looking at launching California to D.C. beginning March 1st, but we are hoping that we can go sooner. We have a lot of groups coming together at Convoy on D.C. 2022 is what it's called.
A couple of Facebook pages have been launched in order to get this thing going, one of which was removed by Facebook for violating their policies around Q stuff, which is absurd when you consider all the misinformation coming from the left, but whatever, that's big tech for you. So the page that got banned, if you try to visit it, you see this. The other Facebook page is called USA Freedom Convoy. So if you want to support this American convoy, perhaps consider visiting that and joining that page. If an American convoy does happen, you just know that leftists in DC and in the mainstream media, they're all going to call it an insurrection. They're probably going to call the truckers terrorists, and they'll blame everything on Trump somehow. They're already doing that with the Canadian protests. Somehow that's all Trump's fault. All those people are white supremacists, and all that crap.
Trump flags have been spotted in Ottawa. Democrats say this is the former president's influence flowing across the border.
But if we do have the American one, if you see any Confederate flags or German flags from World War II, or even Q signs, I highly suspect that those things are all going to be FBI plants or whomever it is that the FBI has hired or the federal government has hired. I mean, I think we're all aware of what to look for these days. In any case, I really hope that this American convoy happens. I actually don't think it will, but maybe. It's an especially attractive option considering the $9 million that was stolen from the Canadian trucker convoy by GoFundMe. One guy actually tried to run over people in the convoy recently, hospitalizing somebody, and the police are now trying to starve the protesters out, and a judge has outlawed honking in Ottawa. Anyway, I'll give you my thoughts on all of this in one moment. First, I have to sell you something. It's a new year and not much has changed. Houses are still selling in like a week. Interest rates are at zero. Our government is still borrowing money, printing money, $5 trillion to be exact. What could possibly go wrong? Meanwhile, consumer confidence has hit a 10-year low. Inflation's hit 6.8%, with parts of the U.S. seeing rates as high as 8%. Something is not adding up. So what can you do? Well, you can play it safe. Put some of your assets in precious metals. This will keep your money away from the volatility of the markets. It'll keep it away from inflation, and it will let you sleep at night. Now this month, Noble Gold is giving away a free 1/10 ounce solid gold American Eagle coin with any qualifying plan that you start. So talk to an expert at Noble Gold and they'll run you through your options for keeping your money safe. There's no pressure, there's no hassle, there's no call centers. You just get a chance to speak with somebody who knows what they're talking about for once. How refreshing is that? Call Noble Gold at 877-646-5347 or visit their website at noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. So by now, I'm sure you guys are all aware that GoFundMe did plan to steal $9 million that was donated to the Canadian truckers and redistribute the money to, quote, credible and established charities verified by GoFundMe. They said that they'd made this decision because the protest had become a, quote, occupation, and that police had reported unlawful activity. The occupation justification is laughable because they've supported leftist occupations in the past, and the unlawful activity justification is just a bold-faced lie. And even if there was unlawful activity, GoFundMe has supported that in the past as well. They indicated that the Freedom Convoy would be able to choose the charities that they were going to redistribute this money to, but who knows if that was actually true. A lot of people, including myself, suspect that the so-called credible and established charities that GoFundMe was going to redistribute the $9 million to were going to be groups like Black Lives Matter and organizations related to Antifa. Honestly, I still think that that was their plan, because soon after GoFundMe announced this ridiculous idea, basically every conservative on the internet lost their shit. As well we should have. Occasionally, when an injustice this insidious occurs, getting upset is actually a good thing. A lot of people pointed out that GoFundMe supported organizations collecting and distributing funds to bail out BLM and Antifa rioters arrested after destroying property and even after being arrested for acts of violence. Some of these people then went on to commit even more egregious crimes. GoFundMe supported the collection and distribution of funds to the violent and destructive Chaz occupation that took over a freaking police station and ended in the death of a teenager. All of that stuff was fine to donate to, but a group of conservatives sitting in their trucks? Oh, those guys are violent and dangerous. Can't have guys sitting in trucks. Pretty sure they're mostly white and male and conservative. I mean, they're basically terrorists. Elon Musk jumped into the fight, referring to GoFundMe as professional thieves, which is precisely what they are. After the outcry, Governor Ron DeSantis indicated his intention to investigate GoFundMe for fraud, and then suddenly GoFundMe announced that, you know what, we're going to refund everybody's money back, and they're giving all the money back to the donors. It's funny how that works. I mean, it's not a perfect ending, but it's a relatively happy one. But not everybody is happy. One guy, aged 42, my age, slammed his ironically named Jeep Patriot into 4 of the convoy protesters, and one of them ended up having to go to the hospital. From what I understand, he's actually okay. Now, the driver of the Jeep is getting slammed with a host of charges, and to that I say, at least Canadian prosecutors are doing their job. But the reason it's important to report on this is that there has been no violence coming from the convoy, but there is violence being perpetrated against them. And you know what? I don't actually blame the violent maniac that seems to have tried to kill these protesters because, okay, I mean, I do blame him, but not entirely, because I blame the mainstream media. They have really done their best to portray these truckers as evil, violent racists. And you know what? They are nothing of the sort. They are the dictionary definition of peaceful protesters.
But events through Saturday morning and afternoon resembled a party more than a riot. What's more, many resented the idea protests could turn violent, represents a fringe minority, or is affiliated with white nationalism.
I wanted to show that it's not just the characterization by the media of who's in this movement, that it's not just far-right extremists, or it's not just one group, that it represents the concerns and interests of a really diverse group of Canadians.
It's such an amazing vibe right now. The people are so positive and so much love in the air right now. It's such a high.
We love ya, Canada, all together. You can see it. Everybody's here. Many Americans too. Every country, we're all together in this.
I've heard the news media refer to the truckers as fascists countless times. Fascists. Fascism is about government controlling the people. This is the people rebelling against government control. The convoy is literally the opposite of fascism. I guess the media is just counting on the public to have no idea what fascism is, and certainly, probably many leftists won't actually know what fascism means, but for those who do, the media is just exposing themselves as either liars or morons. Sadly, hardcore leftists actually don't care if the media lies to them. In their minds, the ends justify the means. Now, at this point, the government is pretty screwed. According to the tow truck companies, there's no way of getting these rigs out of the city. And so, desperate measures have been taken. A judge even banned honking for 10 days, which I think is kind of hilarious. A more serious problem is that the police have begun arresting protesters who have been hauling food and fuel to the truckers.
I don't even think they have the names on those cans. It'd be very hard to give them back after the court had already told they can't take them. But no, the cops like the jerry cans. Want to make sure the truckers don't have enough heat so they can freeze at night. Yeah, sure, no problem. Back up while you're stealing somebody's property, no problem. Police now don't help people, they steal their fuel.
Honestly, what the f***? That is some cruel I thought Canadians were supposed to be friendly. You want to peacefully protest? Fine, but you're going to have to starve or freeze to death. Real nice, Canada. So it's really not the protesters who are violent. They're not trying to hurt anyone. Meanwhile, counter-protesters are running them over, and Canadian police are trying to starve them to death or let them freeze to death. And yet still, it's the truckers that are called fascist. What's really encouraging is that after the fuel ban was enacted, this is how Canadians responded. Who would have thought that Canadians could be this freaking cool?
Play your next move, Trudeau.
And another bit of good news, apparently a judge just ordered the Ottawa police to return all the fuel that they seized. So apparently the police stealing gasoline from the truckers to keep them warm, to keep their trucks running and keep them warm and not freeze to death, apparently that was illegal. Yeah, who would have guessed? One thing that's really nice to see is that Justin Trudeau is clearly freaking out about this.
People of Ottawa don't deserve to be harassed in their own neighborhoods. They don't deserve to be confronted with the inherent violence of a swastika flying on a street corner, or a Confederate flag, or the insults and jeers just because they're wearing a mask.
So hopefully soon he's going to figure out that, you know what, basically all of Canada is against you. And hopefully he'll fold and he will rescind the mandates. Unfortunately, Trudeau seems to think that most Canadians are on his side. I don't think that he's right. I have a cousin who actually lives near Ottawa. She lives in that area. And she supports the convoy. I texted her after this all happened. And turns out she's a huge supporter. She actually went out to the convoy to show her support for the truckers yesterday. And she said she had nothing but positive things to say. Everybody's super happy. Everybody was smiling at her, waving. People were giving high fives. I mean, it was just a very positive atmosphere. So it's nice to know that the locals are actually massively supportive, at least some of them. Justin Trudeau seems to think that everybody in Ottawa hates what's going on. Clearly, that's not true. I have evidence. I have a family member that lives there. She totally supports the truckers. In closing, I'd like to point out that not only has GoFundMe supported violent groups and occupations on the left, but BLM itself is currently being investigated for fraud. Turns out the entire organization may be one big scam. Shocker. But that's a topic for another video. Until then, remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
Someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, but total government control and regulation. Well, isn't this the liberal philosophy? The conservative, so-called, is the one that says less government, get off my back, get out of my pocket, and let me have more control of my own destiny.